Late on a Wednesday night, while most of the world slept, a series of explosions tore through one of the most economically vital pieces of real estate on the planet. The target, South Pars, a sprawling natural gas field straddling the waters between Iran and Qatar, the single largest reservoir of natural gas anywhere on Earth. Israel had just struck it, and within hours, Iran struck back. Not at Israel, at Qatar. The shockwave from those two decisions is still traveling, and it has already reached the desk of the most powerful man in the world, and he is furious. This is not a distant conflict playing out on a map you'll never visit. The fires burning over the Persian Gulf right now are directly connected to the price you pay for energy, the stability of governments across the Middle East, and the increasingly fragile relationship between the United States and its closest military ally. What happened in those hours, and more importantly, what Donald Trump said afterward, reveals something deeply unsettling about the state of this war. The alliance may be cracked, the strategy may be cracked, and no one, not even the President of the United States, appears to be fully in control of what comes next, according to BBC diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams. Citing Israeli newspapers Yedioth Ahronoth and Israel Hayom, the attack on South Pars was not a spontaneous act of war. It was coordinated, or at the very least discussed at the highest level. Israeli sources claim Trump himself talked about the upcoming strike with Gulf state leaders over the weekend before it happened. And yet, hours after the explosions, Trump went on Truth Social and told the world the United States knew nothing about this particular attack. That contradiction alone should stop you cold. Because if both things cannot be true at the same time, someone is lying and the consequences of that lie are enormous. The gap between what Trump said and what Israeli media reported is not a footnote. It is the center of gravity for everything that followed. Yedioth Ahronoth, one of Israel's most widely read centrist newspapers, stated plainly that the strike was coordinated in advance with the United States and agreed upon between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. Israel Hayom, a right-leaning publication with close ties to the Netanyahu government, went even further, reporting that Trump personally discussed the upcoming Israeli strike on Iran's coastal industrial city with leaders of 3 Persian Gulf states over the weekend prior to the attack. These are not fringe sources. These are mainstream Israeli publications with direct access to government officials, quoting people who were apparently present for those conversations. So when Trump writes that America knew nothing, one of two things is happening. Either the Israeli media reports are wrong, and a tightly coordinated strike was somehow carried out without American knowledge, which would be extraordinary given the level of US military integration in the region. Or Trump is constructing a public narrative designed to insulate the United States from the consequences of the attack, specifically from the fallout triggered by Iran's retaliatory strike on Qatar. Either possibility is alarming. One suggests a level of military recklessness that strains credibility. The other suggests a president actively shaping a false reality in real time. And the world cannot afford to get this wrong. To understand why this matters, you need to know what South Pars actually is. This is not just another oil field. South Pars, which Iran shares with Qatar, where it is known as the North Dome, is the single largest natural gas structure ever discovered on Earth. It holds reserves so vast that they have shaped the entire energy architecture of the modern world. Qatar has become one of the wealthiest nations per capita on the planet, almost entirely because of its share of this field. Iran, despite years of sanctions strangling its ability to fully exploit its portion, still depends on South Pars for a significant percentage of domestic gas supply. Millions of Iranian civilians heat their homes and cook their food using gas piped directly from this field. When Israel struck at even a relatively small section, as Trump noted, it was not just a military strike. It was a strike at the economic and domestic stability of a country of 90 million people. The story quickly became more complicated when Iran retaliated. Tehran, apparently believing whether through misinformation, intelligence failure, or deliberate deception that Qatar was somehow involved in or aware of the Israeli strike, launched an attack on Qatar's Long facility. Qatar is home to Al Udeid Air Base, the largest US military installation in the Middle East, housing thousands of American troops and serving as the operational hub for US Central Command. Qatar also hosts some of the most delicate American diplomatic backchannels in the region, including the ceasefire negotiations over Gaza. Striking Qatar was not just a military miscalculation. It was an act that put American assets, American lives, and American diplomatic leverage directly in the crossfire. Trump's Truth Social post addresses this directly, and his language, once you strip away the signature, all caps, and grandiose sign-off, tells a layered and at times contradictory story. He writes that Iran unjustifiably and unfairly attacked a portion of Qatar's Enin gas facility, but then, almost sympathetically, notes that unfortunately Iran did not know that Qatar had no involvement. It is a remarkable sentence. The President of the United States is simultaneously condemning Iran's attack and providing it with what amounts to partial justification, suggesting Tehran acted on bad information. That framing matters enormously. It means Trump is not characterizing Iran as an aggressor, acting in pure malice. He is characterizing Iran as a country that responded to what it genuinely, if incorrectly, believed was a provocation. That is a very different foundation for the diplomatic maneuvering that must now follow. Before we get to what Trump threatened to do next, and this threat is one of the most extreme pieces of presidential language deployed in decades, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you never miss coverage like this. The next part of this story is where the stakes reach a level that affects every country on Earth. Stay with me. Now here is where it escalates to a level that should genuinely alarm you. In that same Truth Social post, Trump issued a warning to Iran that reads less like a diplomatic communique and more like a declaration of intent from a superpower that has run out of patience. He wrote, if Qatar's LNG facilities are attacked again, the United States, and he specified with or without the help or consent of Israel, will, in his words, massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen or witnessed before. Read that again. The President of the United States is threatening to destroy the world's largest natural gas field entirely, unilaterally if necessary. With force Iran has, quote, never never seen or witnessed before. The timeline of events that led to this moment unfolded with terrifying speed. In the early hours of Wednesday, Israeli aircraft struck a section of South Pars on the Iranian side of the field, near the coastal city of Asaliyu. The attack was described by Israeli officials as targeted and limited a strike on infrastructure rather than civilian areas. Energy markets reacted immediately, with natural gas prices spiking globally within hours of the first report. By mid-morning, as trading floors in London and New York opened to the news, the volatility had spread to oil markets, with crude prices climbing as analysts began calculating the risk premium attached to a wider war in the Gulf. Then, by Wednesday afternoon, Iran struck back. The target was not Israeli territory. Iranian forces hit a portion of Qatar's LNG export facility, the infrastructure that allows Qatar to liquefy natural gas and ship it by tanker to customers across Europe and Asia. The implications of that strike extended far beyond the Middle East. European nations that have spent the past 3 years building their energy independence from Russian gas, replacing it with Qatari ong, suddenly face the prospect of that supply being threatened by a conflict they have no control over. By Wednesday evening, the diplomatic scramble was frantic. Qatar immediately sought to communicate to Tehran that it had no foreknowledge of and no involvement in Israel's strike on South Pars. American officials worked back channels to deliver the same message, but Iran had already acted, and the damage, both physical and diplomatic, was done. By the time Trump sat down to compose his Truth Social post late Wednesday night, he was responding not just to an Israeli military operation, but to a cascading series of events that had dragged a neutral American ally into the center of a war it never asked to be part of. Thursday morning brought a Netanyahu press conference that was equal parts defiance and depth. The Israeli prime minister confirmed that Israel had acted alone in striking the gas field, a statement that contradicted his own government's media reports, and acknowledged that Trump had asked Israeli forces to hold off from further strikes of this nature. Netanyahu's framing was carefully calibrated. He repeatedly invoked Trump's authority, asking rhetorically whether anyone believed someone can tell President Trump what to do, and positioning himself as the loyal ally, the leader he called Trump, and I'm his ally. It was the language of a man trying very hard to smooth over a rupture that everyone in the room could feel. The Israeli embassy spokesman in London told the BBC that the two countries are aligned on most or all of our goals regarding the Islamic regime in Iran. Most or all. That qualifier is doing a great deal of work in that sense. The weight of what has just happened lands on several layers simultaneously, and none of them are abstract. Energy markets are the first and most immediate layer. South Pars supplies a meaningful portion of the natural gas that flows into global LNG market. Qatar's LNG facility, now damaged and operating under threat, is a critical node in the supply chain that keeps the lights on across Europe and Asia. Full shutdown of Qatari LNG exports would send European energy prices into territory not seen since the worst months of the Russia-Ukraine energy crisis. Germany, France, Italy, countries that rebuilt their energy security on Qatari gas would face immediate and severe consequences. Consumers would see it in their utility bills within weeks. The second layer is financial. Global oil and gas prices surged on Wednesday, and every percentage point increase in energy costs functions as a tax on every economy in the world. Transportation costs rise, manufacturing costs rise, food prices rise because agriculture runs on energy. The International Monetary Fund has previously warned that a major disruption to Gulf energy supplies could shave multiple percentage points off global GDP growth. That is not an economist abstract. That is jobs, wages, savings, and retirement funds affected in real time, in real country, for real people. The third layer is geopolitical, and arguably the most dangerous. Trump's threat to destroy South Pars unilaterally without Israeli consent is not just military posturing. It is a declaration that the United States is prepared to take an action that would cause a humanitarian catastrophe for 90 million Iranian civilians, trigger a global energy shock of historic proportion, and potentially drag every major power with interests in the Gulf, Russia, China, the European Union, into a confrontation not of their choosing. The phrase, with or without the help or consent of Israel, is particularly striking. David Satterfield, a former US special envoy for the Middle East, told the BBC that Trump is looking for a way to declare a credible victory, not a quixotic regime change goal. But Netanyahu, Satterfield says, sees Iran's chaotic breakdown as a desirable goal. That is a divergence in warring that no amount of press conference choreography can fully conceal. Here is where this story goes from here, and the paths are not equally likely to end well. In the first scenario, diplomatic pressure hold. Qatar successfully communicates neutrality to Iran. Back-channel negotiations, possibly through Omani intermediaries, who have historically played this role, lead Iran to stand down from further retaliatory strikes on Gulf infrastructure. Trump, satisfied that his red line has been acknowledged, scales back the rhetorical temperature. Netanyahu, facing pressure from Washington to constrain further unilateral action, agrees to pause strikes on South Pars. The war continues, but the immediate energy crisis stabilizes and global markets recover the spike. This is the scenario everyone in the diplomatic community is working toward. It requires Iran to accept that it was deceived into striking Qatar, requires Israel to accept American constraints on its targeting, and requires Trump to trust that his threat alone was sufficient. All three conditions are genuinely fragile. In the second scenario, Iran does not hold back. A second strike on Qatari LNG, either in retaliation for the original South Pars attack, or as a calculated escalation to test Trump's resolve, forces the United States to make a decision that no president has ever had to make in the nuclear age, whether to follow through on the destruction of the world's largest natural gas field, If Trump acts, the energy shock alone would be catastrophic. If Trump does not act, the credibility of every future American threat in this conflict and in every other collapses overnight. There is no clean outcome in this branch of the decision tree. In the third scenario, the fracture between the United States and Israel widens beyond what public statements can paper over. Israeli officials continue to pursue regime change in Tehran through targeted assassinations, infrastructure attacks, and the systematic degradation of Iranian state authority. Trump, facing domestic polling that shows support for the war sitting below 50% inside the United States, concludes that the political cost of an open-ended conflict is unsustainable heading into the midterm election. The alliance holds in name but frays in practice, with each side pursuing objectives that are no longer fully compatible. Netanyahu, for whom this war represents a defining political legacy and potentially a lifeline for his own political survival, has every incentive to keep pushing. Trump, who built his brand on making deals and declaring victories, has every incentive to find an exit. Those two incentives are on a collision course. 3 weeks into this conflict, with energy prices climbing, diplomatic alliances straining, and a presidential Truth Social post that raises more questions than it answers, one thing is undeniable. This war is not going the way anyone planned. The decisions being made now in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, in Doha, will determine whether the next chapter of this story is a tense but manageable de-escalation or a catastrophe that reshaped the global order. The deadline is not fixed, the consequences are permanent, and the world is watching every word.